Well, we're going to continue with our great speakers, and our first keynote address is actually an interview, great style, and that is with our global entrepreneur, Derek Handley. And to facilitate this is Andrew Patterson. Now, Andrew is a man who's had over 20 years media experience and is a passionate business champion and presenter of the specialist program Sunday Business on Radio Live. So it is my pleasure to introduce Andrew, who will take over this session. Please put your hands together for Andrew Patterson.
To introduce possibly one of New Zealand's most well-known technology entrepreneurs. Derek certainly adheres to the definition of an A-type personality. In fact, just keeping up with him can be a challenge in itself. His business story begins in 2001 when he launched the Hyper Factory with his brother, one of the first agencies in the world to recognise the power of mobile devices for connecting consumers, brands and mass media. The company helps the world's leading brands create strategies and technology for engaging with the billions of people using mobile and tablet devices to navigate their lives. It's the most awarded mobile agency globally and was listed by Entrepreneur magazine as one of the top 100 brightest ideas of 2010 and Brand Week's 10 brightest ideas of 2008. And the New York Stock Exchange listed company Meredith Corporation acquired the company in 2010, which certainly made Derek's bank balance look significantly more healthy than it was at the time. Derek has been named in Silicon Alley 100 of the most influential technology people in New York, as well as being recognised as a world-class New Zealander and as a Peter Blake Trust leader. He's also a former New Zealand Business Leader of the Year and Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year. And more recently, he's co-founder and chairman of Mobile. We will, just one more. Snack Media, which is perhaps his latest sort of incarnation at the moment. Of course, he's worked alongside Richard Branson, he's an author, and of course he's on the board of Sky Television and trustee of the New Zealand Arts Foundation. Right, Derek, welcome. Let's get underway because, I mean, you are one of those rare people almost who was there at the birth of the internet, and you were there really at that time where you were able to perhaps begin to see opportunities quite quickly for it. What's your sense about where we are right now in the evolution, almost 20 years on from that creation, the exponential growth that we have seen, and I guess the potential that the internet offers for regions like the Pacific, which of course is the purpose of today?
I think that it's really interesting to use the word exponential because that's a word that's being thrown around a lot in certain circles in the world that are trying to predict what the future will look like in 10 or 20 years in a very sci-fi way. And the way people are using that term is to describe that we're only pretty much at the very, very beginning of what the potential of the internet and what it represents. And also, which we'll hear about later today, which I'm excited to hear about, satellites and what they represent. So I think the last 20-something years has just been kindergarten of what technology can and will achieve. And mobile started to light that fire up a little bit. And in developing countries in Africa and India, that's starting to pick up in a significant way, but still several billion people do not have smart devices, but in a few years they will. Several billion people who have mobile phones are nowhere near of the capacity and capability of the phones we have. So we're just at the very beginning of a cusp of a whole intersection of multiple trends that are going to have really big impact. So one of them is the power of the devices now, which is it's as powerful as the space program, right? And it will just continue according to Moore's law, which means the processor doubles in power every 18 months. Will continue forever that way. We have unlimited storage now. So at the beginning of the internet, storage was a problem. You had to buy servers, you had to build server farms, and now storage is basically a commodity. It's in the cloud, and anyone can access as much capacity as they want and spike up and spike down. You have total connectivity everywhere. So you've got GPS capabilities, full coverage, and well, not in the Pacific at the moment, but in most markets, starting to have areas that are entirely covered by Wi-Fi, mobile, and multi-mobile channels. So all of these are kind of coming together at a time where people are starting to really rethink what does that mean for business. So for the Pacific, it's a question of thinking what other leapfrogs that are going to happen in the next few years. Because things are starting to get faster and faster and faster at a rate which I think the last 10 years will make the next 10 years look like child's play. So betting on the wrong technologies, betting on the wrong strategies could have a lot of negative implications. Whereas you look at countries like African countries, they're basically leapfrogging entirely on an energy perspective. They're not building centralized energy, they're building decentralized energy. On a communications perspective, they're using the mobile device and not even using computers. And that's kind of part of what the challenge is for our community. And to me, I think a large part of that is what's happening with satellites. So the satellite project of Iridium Motorola in 1990 cost $5 billion to set up one constellation. And today we are here 25 years later, and it costs $100,000 to launch a satellite. And the cost of satellite is reducing at a pace faster than Moore's law. So every 9 months, the cost and the power of satellites is getting double the power. So in short, there are huge opportunities. But with reference back to the opening, I also think there's lots of risks, because technology has, in the Western world, created lifestyles that I don't think we necessarily want or need in the Pacific. This kind of always-on, 24/7 environment, this constant checking of social feeds and other things that I think are starting to negatively affect the way young people live, the way people live, and the way they're attached to. Almost, I'm imagining the next few years we will start hearing about addictions and different illnesses of people attached to the internet and devices, which I think we want to avoid at all costs.
Yes, there was a piece of research out this week which said that the average teen in the UK, and will be the same in New Zealand, are now attached to technology 26.5 hours a week, which is effectively one entire 3 working days. I read a fantastic book recently called The Second Machine Age, which argued that there have only been 2 inventions that have truly revolutionised the world. The first was the steam engine, and the benefits of that lasted 100 plus years. And the second is the smartphone, and that's barely 5 years old. I wondered if you'd agree with that assessment, and whether or not you believe... Well, 2 inventions that have fundamentally changed the world. And I think, it's an interesting analysis.
Fundamentally changed the world.
Well, yeah, I sort of... we won't get into the semantics of the point.
The press, the Gutenberg press, that probably changed a few things.
That's
Figured out the Bible. That's okay.
We'll take the point at the moment. The smartphone probably is up there with the press and all of those others you mentioned. How is that going to perhaps continue to evolve, do you think, as somebody that kind of follows these trends closely?
So it's interesting because, as you said, I'm on a media company that's diving into this board of a media company that's diving into consumption via a tablet and smartphones. I have a smartphone media company in New Zealand and Australia. But my personal view is that the device itself has, at this point, at least for the next few years, reached a lot of what we are expecting from as human beings. Everything it's got in it, in its form factor, isn't evolving anymore. It's getting a little bit more powerful constantly. But I think we're at this kind of space where the device has still got huge latent power, and we just need to figure out what to do with it. And that's where business models are starting to spring up, where people are just starting to think about it differently. So what can we do with the fact that every single person is walking around essentially like a sensor, because they can sense anything and you can attach to their locations. So I think we're at the very beginning of where can this go, and the initial explorations have been interesting, fun, but we haven't even yet got to the point of how this is meaningful for health, wellness, and things to make a meaningfully better life. At the moment, we're still focused mostly on commerce and revenue models, internet business models. So there's still a lot of exploration to happen, and that's what in the next few years is going to be so exciting.
So if we think about that particular point around those business opportunities, and again, particularly from a Pacific perspective, do you have any thoughts about where you think this could move in terms of very niche markets like in the Pacific, where the opportunities that will exist for them?
Well, it's not something I've spent an enormous amount of time thinking about, but I do look for models that technology is empowering new ways of creating jobs, well-being, and community development in developing countries. So the things that are most interesting to me at the moment are people who are building schools to train kids in Africa how to code, and then essentially outsource that coding to big American companies like Google and LinkedIn. So at the same time, creating a school, creating a job, and creating revenue from the beginning. So one example of that is a company called Andela, which just set up in Kenya specifically to do that, to find the smartest Kenyan kids who had no other path to university or any other kind of job, and turns them into coders, and in real time pays them and sells their services elsewhere. There's another company called SummerSource, which has a similar model, which is looking to find different skill sets that are, again, across Africa, that can be exported across the internet to big companies that want to buy them. So they're like micro tasks that you can kind of outsource to SummerSource. It may be administration, it may be management of some certain content, but basically things that you can teach people to do, and it doesn't matter where they are. So business models like this are emerging that are trying to help build communities very remote from where the actual customer is.
Coding is potentially becoming the next call center opportunity.
It could be.
Yeah.
It's just one example.
Sure. If we get, just sticking with coding for a bit, and we look at it in this country, we've barely begun to embrace that opportunity. How much is there a potential for regions like
But
this?
SummerSource is not coding, actually. It's just learning how to use the devices for the purposes of something that people are willing to buy offshore. But the other one, Andela, is teaching kids how to code. I think that I'm not really sure, how do you assess whether a country or a nation or a region is ready to code?
What do you believe is the biggest change we've seen, both from a consumer perspective but also businesses in terms of adaptation? So the adaptation issue, you mentioned before, the potential obviously for some of the social fallout, but what else are you seeing from an adaptation perspective?
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I guess adapting to the way things are happening in terms of the way that we are, I guess, fundamentally having to change our lifestyles and our views. Well, what are some of those broader implications for this new world order that we're now playing with?
Well, in the Western world, I think there's just an increasing expectation of being constantly connected. But I think that there's starting to be a backlash towards that, because it's counterproductive to a lot of things that make fulfilling lives. To constantly have to worry that you're attached to something. So there is an inkling of a movement around the world of people trying to say, well, what is the right balance here? Because definitely there's a sector of society that's gone off the deep end, and they're not balanced. And then there are sectors of society that aren't really even connected at all. So there's something in the middle that I think is being explored and will evolve. And for the Pacific, I think that's kind of the opportunity to try and find a perfect, perfect balance.
In your time with the V team, you were working with it, thinking a lot about issues, particularly affecting developing countries and so forth. Is this something that is starting to, obviously we're starting to get more consciousness about it, but is this something that potentially has, I guess a more, the opportunities there, it's a matter of sort of trying to work out how we adapt to them?
You mean in terms of the connectivity opportunities there? It's about, so I mean, most places they're already, you know, if you're in New York or London, you are connected. I think when you're designing a strategy to take a set of Pacific nations towards greater connectivity, you want to bear in mind what the downfall and the risks are, and try to design it in such a way that it's contributing to the essence of what that company and that culture is about. And that I think is our new, our new opportunities. And just going down the same path that an Africa or China or India has done is not necessarily the right way for Pacific communities. So, that's kind of something that needs to evolve as this discussion evolves.
Yeah. So you mentioned about risks. What do you see as risks in this space at the moment?
Risks that everything is lived digitally and not physically, and that people are reliant 100% on their devices and connectivity to do everything. Whereas, true meaning and success as people or significance as people is built in human connections and community and a lot of the things that Matu and the Reverend were talking about. And I think that we are losing some of that. When you go to dinner and you see 9 kids and they're all in their screens, as opposed to talking to their friends. Those kind of things are happening around the world and people are starting to talk about them and are starting to get worried about them. So that's kind of what I'm referring to.
Do you believe the focus now really needs to be on mobile as opposed to broadband, given that globally 4G subscriptions are expected to grow tenfold over the next 5 years, from 88 million in 2012 to 864 million is one estimate in 2017. Where should the focus be?
Well, that's my point. I don't know, but my point is maybe it's not mobile, maybe it's satellites. I don't know enough about what the satellite solution is, but I also don't know enough about the geography, what we're talking about across the islands, how vast they are. Because the problem with networks is you have to keep upgrading them. So I read something about 5G coming around in a few, So if satellite is going to outpace the fixed network, is the fixed mobile network infrastructure going to become the new fixed line infrastructure, which is, the copper line is being dismissed as the history? Well, are we at the risk of going down a path of building a fixed mobile network, which is by putting up these transmitters, and then in 5 years, the cost of satellite makes it within a business plan viability to actually cover a nation using that technology? So that's, I think, a really interesting decision point. Because again, infrastructure for mobile networks is really expensive. But yeah, you're not building copper line everywhere, but still you have to keep transmitting and responding.
Do you have a view at this stage, or is it?
No, but I'm really fascinated by it and looking into it a lot. I think that people are really starting to wonder what are the uses of satellites going to be. Because in essence, in a few years, you'll be able to take pictures and videos of anywhere in the world constantly. And what does that mean? I think the average person's first experience of satellite is Google Maps. But that's a static one, and it kind of, I think we're going to go into a whole new realm in the next decade that will totally transform a lot of things that we can do, and I have no idea what they are.
Because clearly this has implications beyond the Pacific to third world.
Exactly. That's why people are so interested in all this. Google is up there with its Project Loon, and there's all sorts of people working on it. There's a company called Planet Labs, which is focused on deploying constellations of satellites and encouraging lots of people to figure out new business models and uses for them. I think those are the guys that you can set one up for $100,000. So it's just going like this. It's the same thing as the smartphone, where the prices of the price went like this, the power went like this. It's the same with satellites.
If we look at the Pacific region as a subset of the global economy, it already has some of the most expensive broadband charges in the world. In fact, according to London, said just from reading this, what you pay. How disadvantaged is the region going to be in the future if it's not able to have the sort of connectivity that the rest of the world has come to expect? Is this going to become the new world order, that gap is just going to become so much more pronounced?
Yeah, I think that's a very dangerous idea to think about. Like, to not have connectivity is an extremely risky proposition for, not business, I mean business yes, but just for society, because everything is moving to let's call it the cloud.
Education, health.
Exactly. So if you aren't educating your children using technology and delivering via the networks and health, you're going to end up with the equivalent of today talking about 18th century, 19th century technology. Like, you need to have these things in mind because they're going to be fundamental to actually just taking care of people and educating people. So, but the flip side is if you do it, then the education and the health can be exponentially, transformatively better. And that's what's really exciting. So, I have a 2.5-year-old and I'm thinking about what school to send him to, and I actually think the school system doesn't work. I think it's kind of conceptually broken because everything else in the world is personalized and you can try and figure out how to get it personalized. Clearly, people learn differently, and in the ideal world, every single student at school would have a very customized path. And once they learn something, they just keep moving on. They wouldn't have to keep going with the class. All sorts of things that don't make any sense. Why does it start at 9 and end at 3 when everyone has to go to work at 9 and have to go? So it's crazy. So people are taking internet-type thinking and reinventing school. And I read about these guys called the Alt School, which is just opening up down the road from me in Brooklyn. But they've built about 6 in Silicon Valley. And they just raised $100 million from some foundations and Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook and Steve Jobs' wife. And they're basically thinking about school like an internet experience. And they're building an operating system for the whole school. Like you have iOS for your iPhone or you have Windows for your computer. They're building an entirely new set of platforms underneath. How can you treat this in the way that an internet company would treat their customers? So it's fascinating. You can go to their website, and it's all only possible through digital backbone, but still the very human element is really strong as well. The physical experience they're creating is very different, and all sorts of things are being rethought because of technology.
So this idea that geographical location doesn't have to be a disadvantage.
Right, and even what they're thinking about, which I love the most, is they're creating micro schools, and you can actually just cruise between them. So say, for example, I wanted to move to, I had a job and I had to work in San Francisco for a month. I could just take my kid and plop him into Alt School in the Bay Area, and then I could take him back and put him back into Brooklyn Heights. And if they ever come to New Zealand and Auckland, which I hope they do, then in the summer I can just take them down to Brooklyn. And I mean, that's the way an internet company would think, and it should be totally possible. That's what their idea is.
So how do you believe businesses and even governments in the Pacific should be addressing this issue? I mean, given that they also have they also have significant constraints in terms of relatively small populations, but do you also think that populations increasingly won't matter because the system will move beyond that?
Well, I think population matters because it costs money to set up whatever infrastructure, right? So that's a challenge, and then you have to somehow pay it back. So it's like anything, like a road. If you don't have enough people using it, it's like, well, what's the cost benefit of building a road? So, holding out for hope that the cost of access starts to get to a point where you can reach populations that are very small in very remote areas. I don't know how you forecast all of that, but it is a challenge if you've got small populations that are really disparate and spread out. It's no different to the last mile problem of the internet that they had, where you get to a certain point and then it's not economical to go into the country and build those lines.
Looking into your crystal ball, which you've been doing, you've been doing all your life, what do you believe the kind of the next round of innovation? You've mentioned a number in your answers so far. Where do you think that the next round of innovation is going to come from?
Well, this is what I'm spending a lot of time on my crystal ball at the moment. I haven't got super clear answers. I'm trying to explore what the ramifications and possibilities from satellites are. I think that's going to be huge. There's a whole new economy coming out. I mean, there are several subsets of the economies that everyone hears about. Sharing economy, which is looking at any physical real resource that is not being used and how could it be used by using the internet to let people that it's available, whether it's a house, an accommodation, or a car. That's an interesting trend that continues. The other trend that's happening hugely at the moment in the US is the on-demand workforce. So this company called Instacart, which for me, I've never really thought why this would be useful, but it's extremely useful apparently. They are now creating an on-demand workforce for you to tell people to go and do your shopping. So you basically put in your app a shopping list that's got different stores, and someone pops their hand up and basically takes that job, does it manually, and delivers it to your house. And Instacart is like a 3-year-old company that's now worth $3 billion. But it's built on this on-demand type of sector, which Uber is also a part of that. There's many companies who are a part of it. But it's just an overarching trend of there are resources, they're latent, they don't have jobs, they don't have something to do, but they're available if you need them. So all these things are kind of merging. And then the great thing about where we are today, which I think in the last 20 years we kind of stopped, or even some of these in the last 50 years, is the really bold dreams have come back again. So going to space and building electric cars. Those things for the last 20 years were just kind of jokes, the Jetsons cartoon and stuff. But people are now bold enough to revisit some of these, of the boldest humanitarian types of business models. And we haven't really had that, since I was at school, and there's no one kind of capturing imagination saying I'm going to Mars, and now we have those people. So it's kind of fascinating that on the one hand you're getting someone to get your groceries, and on the other hand someone's trying to build a company and go to Mars. So anything's possible.
So when you're in Samoa or Tonga or Fiji in 5 years' time, what are you expecting to find? What would be your perfect scenario?
Good connectivity would be good. Good broadband.
That's not going to cost you a fortune.
Yeah, not cost you a fortune. I think thriving communities doing things that are unique to the skills of that community that enable them to participate in a global economy. Someone emailed me an idea which I thought was really interesting, which was a lot of people who are working in technology or in fields where they don't have to physically be at their desk all the time would love to live in multiple places. And his concept was basically, why don't we set up small island states to embrace these kind of transient workers? So say they're developers or software managers or whatever, and they kind of come in and settle for short periods of time, do their work remotely in a beautiful environment, say it's summer there and it's winter in New York or London, and then kind of transition back. So creating homes for these transient workers who are highly intelligent, have high affluence, and do highly skilled jobs, but enable them to do them from really beautiful places. And you mentioned Richard Branson, and essentially that's what he's done with his life. Bought an island, and eventually what's happened with that island is it's become his headquarters. And he works from there constantly, but not only that, he constantly has people visiting it, the smartest people in the world. He basically uses it as a conference center, a gathering center. So, and then there's a group of people, young people, who bought a mountain called Powder Mountain in Utah, and they're trying to do the same thing. It's called Summit. 6 kids, like 25 to 30, they bought a mountain and they're building a community around the idea that people want to go to remote, unique, beautiful places to do their work and meet interesting people, and they're so bold that they're actually trying to build a town. So I think there are some really big dreams that you could try to imagine that are possible as more and more people try to find ways to escape the normalcy of living in a big city or living under this 24/7 life cycle. So imaginative approaches and a flourishing little community would be amazing to see. But not just communities of locals, but communities of all sorts of people coming in. The second thing I'd love to see is, from an environmental perspective, self-sustainability. We were talking about energy before, but that applies to a lot of different things too, like food, local produce, because that local movement is now happening in the Western world. Like, so New York, the hottest food movement is the local movement. So no one wants to buy their food that came from all around the rest of the world because they know it's bad for the planet, it's not necessarily fresh, it's not necessarily good for them. So the whole movement in those countries now is, where's the food that was grown locally that I can tell where it came from and which farmers did it? And yet, this chef, Robert Oliver, who spends a lot of time in the Pacific, he's saying a lot of these fancy hotels just import all their food. And they should be thinking about how they curate beautiful local menus using local food, and that helps also stimulate the economy. So all these things are kind of interrelated.
Just finally wrap up, it also strikes me that we know the Pacific region, the major earner, of course, is tourism. So people are the risk for that sector is that unless it maintains this degree of connectivity, it is going to be impossible to sort of visit without a degree of connectivity. We might not want to be on 24/7, but we're going to have it. So to be excluded is only going to put at risk other parts of the economy as well.
Right. Unless you wanted to super differentiate yourself and say we're the only island with no internet connection.
Yeah.
If you wanted to just totally detox, this is the island.
Maybe have a few of those as well.
That'd be pretty good. So if you're a nation that has a multiple islands, just pick a couple of islands that are total detox islands, and then people pay more to go to detox islands.
Charge the premium. All right, we'll wrap it up there, ladies and gentlemen. Derek Handley.